What if your reality wasn't yours? What if someone could make you doubt your own memory, your emotions, even your sanity, while smiling through it? This isn't fiction. It's gaslighting. And it's one of the most dangerous forms of psychological manipulation, because you often don't know it's happening until it's too late. Gaslighting doesn't start with insults. It starts with a question. Are you sure that happened? You're too sensitive. That's not how I remember it. And just like that, reality begins to bend. Gaslighting is psychological warfare disguised as concern. It's not loud. It's subtle. It's slow. And that's what makes it dangerous. At its core, gaslighting is the deliberate act of distorting someone's perception of reality to gain control over them. It can happen in a relationship, in a friendship, at work, even in families. But the tools are always the same: doubt, blame, reversal, repetition. Here's how it works. You express something real, a feeling, a memory, a boundary, and the other person doesn't confront it. They dismantle it. Not by fighting you, but by making you question yourself. Maybe you said, "That really hurt me," and they replied, "You're imagining things. That didn't happen like that." Or you brought up something they said, and they smiled and said, "You always twist my words. You're being dramatic again." In that moment, you feel confused. Not angry, not sure, just off balance. And that confusion, that's the goal. Because once you start questioning your own emotions, you begin to depend on their version of the truth. They become your filter, your reference point, your narrator. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop trusting yourself. Psychologist Robin Stern calls this the gaslight effect, where the victim, over time, starts to internalize the manipulator's version of events. You begin to say things like, "Maybe I am overreacting. Maybe I'm too emotional. Maybe it's my fault." This is not weakness, it's conditioning, and it's powerful. Because the human mind craves stability. We want our emotions to make sense. We want the people close to us to validate our experience. When they don't, and when they twist it instead, our sense of reality starts to crack. And that's the real damage, not the argument, not the incident, but the lingering question, can I trust myself anymore? The philosopher Descartes once said, "I think, therefore I am." But gaslighting rewrites that into, "I doubt myself, therefore I obey." And if you're not careful, you'll start to confuse being uncertain with being wrong. And that's exactly where they want you. Gaslighters don't need to lie loudly. They just need you to whisper your own truth with uncertainty. But what makes someone a gaslighter? Are they always narcissists? Are they doing it on purpose? Let's break the myth. Gaslighting isn't always about cruelty. It's about control. Control over a person. Control over a dynamic. Control over the story. The gaslighter's goal is simple. Keep you unsure enough that they remain the authority on what's real. They often come across as charming, calm, even rational. That's part of the strategy. Because when someone looks composed and logical, while you feel emotional, confused, and reactive, they gain credibility. You lose yours. It's psychological judo. They flip your reaction back onto you. You cry, they call it guilt tripping. You stay quiet. They call it passive-aggressive. You speak up. They call it dramatic. It's never about the content. It's always about flipping the frame. Psychologically, gaslighters tend to follow predictable patterns. Often, they lack empathy, they resist accountability, and they rely on narrative control to protect their self-image. But it's not always clinical. Not every gaslighter is diagnosable. Some are just deeply insecure, and manipulation becomes a defense. They fear being seen, so they flip the light onto you. They avoid responsibility, so they rewrite events. One of their favorite tools, repetition, say a lie often enough, and it starts to feel like truth. This is what philosopher Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silence, repetition, gradual erosion. You don't fall into a gaslighting dynamic overnight. It happens in layers. First, they challenge your memory, then your intentions, then your emotions, then your entire identity. And by the time you realize something is wrong, you're already second-guessing your ability to leave. Because now you're emotionally tied to the person, causing the confusion. And part of you wants them to be right, because if they're right, it means you're not broken. You're just misunderstood. But that's hope. That hope is often what keeps you stuck. Gaslighters don't just manipulate facts. They manipulate your need to feel loved, your need to be accepted, your desire to fix what's broken. That's what makes it so effective and so invisible. Until you step back, until you realize the patterns, until you start asking, what would this look like if I trusted myself again? Because that's when the spell starts to break. Gaslighting doesn't leave bruises. It leaves questions. Maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe I'm not trying hard enough. Maybe it's me. Over time, those aren't just thoughts. They become beliefs. And then, they become identity. This is the hidden damage of gaslighting. It doesn't just confuse your mind, it rewrites it. One of the most brutal effects is cognitive dissonance, the psychological tension that happens when two conflicting truths live inside you at the same time. On one side, you feel hurt, you remember what was said, you feel something is off. But on the other, they're calm, they say they love you. They tell you it's all in your head. So you're torn between what you feel and what you're told to believe. And in that split, you start to lose grip on reality. To relieve the tension, the brain often does the easiest thing. It chooses the version that causes less conflict. So you ignore your instincts, you override your emotional signals. You edit your own memory just to keep the peace. And slowly, something inside you goes quiet. Your voice, your inner compass, your sense of self. This is identity erosion. You begin to live in their reality. You look to them for clarity, for permission, for confirmation that what you feel is real. That dependency is not love, it's survival. And it creates emotional fatigue. You're tired, not from what you do, but from who you have to be around them. Tired from second-guessing every sentence. Tired from keeping the peace. Tired from swallowing your anger so often that it turns into self-blame. Gaslighting makes you feel responsible for your own harm. You'll apologize for things you didn't do. Explain things you never meant. Defend yourself when you've done nothing wrong. And the worst part, you begin to think that's normal. That love is supposed to feel like uncertainty. That your emotions are always suspect. That your value depends on how well you can avoid conflict. But that's not love, and it's not you. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once said, "The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have." Gaslighting traps you in a false present, where you constantly rewrite your feelings, just to keep the illusion alive. But deep down, a part of you remembers who you were before the confusion, before the doubt, before you started erasing yourself to stay safe. And that part, it's still there, waiting for clarity, waiting for truth, waiting for you to stop shrinking into their version of your story. Gaslighting only works when you stop trusting yourself. So the exit begins the moment you start listening to yourself again. Not loudly, not perfectly, just consistently. The first step is recognition, noticing the patterns, the tension in your chest before a conversation, the way your language changes. I think, I could be wrong. Maybe it's just me. Those aren't quirks. They're defense mechanisms. And they're trying to tell you something. You've been taught that truth isn't safe unless someone else agrees with it, but that's a lie. Psychologically, the mind keeps records, even when you're being manipulated. You'll notice that your memories don't vanish, they just start to conflict with what you're being told. That conflict, that's the clue. It means there's still a you under the conditioning, still a mind that remembers what actually happened. Start writing things down, not to prove it to them, but to remind yourself. What was said, what you felt, what changed after you spoke up. This is how you break the spell. With facts, with emotional evidence, with the small act of believing yourself again. From a psychological lens, this is called reality testing, the process of comparing internal perception with external evidence. It's the opposite of gaslighting, and it's what leads to liberation. But here's what's hard. Gaslighters don't like being seen. So the moment you stop absorbing their narrative, they'll push harder. They might shift the tactic, from charm to guilt, from deflection to victimhood, from you're crazy to I can't believe you're doing this to me. That's not proof you're wrong. It's proof you're waking up. Because control requires predictability, and the moment you stop reacting the way you used to, they lose control. This is the moment most people give up, because they mistake pressure for truth. They think the louder someone protests, the more valid their argument must be. But a gaslighter's panic isn't your mistake. It's their mask slipping. And once you see the mask clearly, it's hard to unsee it. The philosopher Epictetus once wrote, "You may fetter my leg, but my will, not even Zeus himself can overpower." That's what's at stake here. Not just truth, but will. Your ability to think, feel, and exist without asking for permission. You don't need to convince them. You don't need them to validate your experience. Because the moment you start choosing your reality over their version of it, you've already begun to leave. And the more you trust that instinct, the louder your own voice becomes. You lose comfort. You lose the familiar version of love. You lose the illusion that keeping quiet keeps the peace. But what you gain is non-negotiable. You gain your voice, your memory, your right to feel without permission. You begin to exist outside of their story, and for the first time, you become the narrator of your own. It's not easy. Some people won't like this new version of you. Not because you've changed, but because you've stopped being convenient. You'll be called distant, cold, selfish, hard to love, but that's not who you are. That's just what you are when you're no longer controlled. Psychologist Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are," but he left something out. The price of that privilege is everything you had to be to survive. So now the question isn't, is it time to walk away from the gaslighter? The question is, are you willing to walk away from the version of you who believed them? Because until you do, they never really leave.